Hi everybody, welcome to another live stream by Passionate Pachyderms. Excuse the way I look, my hair's a mess and not looking my best today, but I've been working on this, and sometimes it's just the nature of a pain patient, you don't look your best.
My hair, on the other hand, is incredible.
And this is Chuck Pithy, my better half. He puts up with all of the nonsense. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to get through parts 1 and 2 of this. Pain and I can't say the word. Anyway, you know the title of the live stream. I apologize for this taking me as long as it has. Due to my illness and overall medical conditions, it often takes me a great deal longer to accomplish these things than I would like, but I'm getting there. I've managed to complete parts 1 and 2 and hope to be completing the other 3 parts within the next few weeks. Thanks for being patient. I hope you all will feel it was worth the wait. In this series of 5 streams, I'll be covering several things in depth, all of which are of great importance to those who suffer chronic pain, their loved ones, those treating chronic pain patients, and those who recognize that they too are but one illness, one accident away from becoming a chronic pain patient, and that becoming a chronic pain patient isn't something one plans. It happens in a moment, often when you least expect it. You might see your doctor for a nagging ache somewhere, and after all the tests are done, he informs you that you've got one of over 200 diseases and conditions which are incurable, untreatable, life-altering, or sometimes even fatal. Or perhaps in the blink of an eye, you're involved in a freak accident, a car accident, fall victim to a failed or botched surgery or medical procedure, which has left you suffering excruciating pain that you cannot escape. The kind of pain that isn't eased by Tai Chi, yoga, exercise, biofeedback, meditation, distraction, acupuncture, Tylenol, Motrin, anti-inflammatory drugs, Advil, anti-seizure medications, chiropractic adjustments, physical therapy, non-FDA approved injections into your spine and or neck, nerve burning, additional surgeries, psychiatric drugs never meant for the treatment of pain, cannabis, kratom, CBD oil, prayer, or learning to live with it. President Trump recently went on CNBC and spoke about the opioid epidemic. I'm coming out to speak on the same subject matter in hopes he will by some miracle find himself watching this live stream. And if he doesn't, I want to say it on behalf of myself and all of the others his misguided war on drugs is catastrophically harming. Here's a hint. There are far more Americans who are not addicts that have been / are being hurt by this and our government's actions than there are addicts, period, let alone addicts who have been helped in any way by the government's actions. As I've reported in my earlier live streams on this subject matter, our country spends nearly $40 billion on drug rehab each year. Rehab that fails 90 to 95% of the time. And yet our government continues to believe throwing more and more of our hard-earned money at this problem is the answer. In what crazy utopian dream world does it make sense to continue throwing billions of dollars at a supposed solution to the drug addiction problem, a problem which affects only 2.1 million Americans, according to the Drug Addiction Center of America, and fails 90 to 95% of the time? Why not use some of that money to develop addiction treatment that actually works? Well, while I'm giving you all statistical numbers, keep in mind that more than 100 million Americans suffer chronic pain daily, enough to affect their work-life activities on a regular basis. More than 16.5 million suffer severe, intractable chronic pain bad enough to require daily pain medication to help control it and offer them some ability to function in their activities of daily living. Activities of daily living include getting out of bed, taking a shower, getting dressed, feeding themselves. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if we have 2.1 million addicts in this country and more than 16.5 million severe intractable chronic pain patients in need of pain medication daily just to live, it seems to me we have a much bigger, inadequately treated, untreated chronic pain epidemic in America than we do a drug addiction epidemic. That said, common sense would tell us that we should be spending 8 times more on the adequate, appropriate treatment of chronic intractable pain than we are on addiction, and yet this simply isn't the case. In fact, despite there being 8 times more Americans suffering chronic pain, severe enough to require daily pain medications to treat it, our government is actively engaged in making it nearly impossible for those suffering intractable pain to be adequately or appropriately treated. For those who are able to find doctors willing to treat them at all, they find in most cases those doctors refuse to prescribe pain medications in doses adequate to effectively control their pain. The CDC's official definition of an epidemic is the occurrence of more cases of a disease than expected in a given area or among a specific group of people over a particular period of time. However, drug addiction in our country has in fact not exploded as the CDC and others would have you believe. The fact is, the rate of addiction in the United States today is almost exactly the same as it has been for decades. In fact, since 1920, it hasn't changed. It has neither risen nor fallen significantly from year to year, or for that matter, from decade to decade. But the government doesn't want you to know this and doesn't want you to figure it out. That said, why is it we are literally throwing away $40 billion a year at a problem in which those affected make the choice to spend their money buying illegal/illegally obtained drugs, knowing full well the dangers of doing so, then swallow, snort, smoke, or inject those illegally obtained substances, typically mixing them with other illegal drugs and washing them down with alcohol for no reason other than to obtain their desired high. All the while, making it virtually impossible for chronic pain patients to even find doctors willing to treat them, let alone willing to prescribe their pain medications in amounts adequate to treat or control their pain. At the rate of Americans suffering severe chronic pain, which requires daily pain medications, continues to rise, not because, of any unchecked substance abuse problem gone wild, but rather because we have an aging baby boomer population that is living longer than Americans have ever lived before, and has spent the majority of their lives engaged in the backbreaking labor required to build the country we now live in, to make, invent, and improve many of the products we can't live without, and to provide our children and grandchildren with the lives they now enjoy. As we continue to age, our bodies naturally begin to break down, and as they do, it becomes harder to recover from illness and injuries or fight off disease. This isn't a new phenomena or anything particularly unique to baby boomers or any other generation. It's just a physiological fact. Chronic pain patients, much like diabetics or epileptics, don't abuse their meds. They don't wash them down with booze or mix them together to obtain a euphoric high or take a trip without ever having left the place they're in. They need those medications to treat pain resulting from legitimate medical conditions. In what universe is it right to force these legitimate patients to sign pain contracts, submit to drug tests, pill counts, and dangerous non-FDA approved invasive procedures, injections, and surgeries, dangling the prescriptions they need to survive and live from one day to the next over their heads like carrots, and after forcing them to submit to all this, refuse to give them adequate amounts of their needed medications to treat their pain? In what America is it okay for patients dying of horrific diseases like cancer, or post-operative patients, patients suffering from incurable degenerative disease processes, and accident victims to be denied safe, effective pain management medications and treat them like criminals and drug addicts because they're in need of that medication?
Now hold on a second here. This I can speak to from experience. Packy's mom went into hospice. She was in severe pain because of what she was going through. They were concerned that they didn't want to prescribe too much pain medication because she might be addicted, even though they told us she had probably less than 2 weeks to live. Now, I don't know about you, but any of my friends, any of my relatives, if they've only got 2 weeks to live and they somehow become addicted to painkillers, that would be the least of my worries. Plus, she didn't get addicted to painkillers. Nothing happened. She didn't get high. All that happened is when she received her medicine, she was in a little less discomfort than before. And that I can tell you is a fact.
That is true. Full disclosure, I am a big Trump supporter. Most of you know that. And I'm unapologetic for being so. However, I have a serious issue with Trump's stance on pain medications and take huge issue with the things he says publicly regarding the supposed opioid epidemic. Much of what Trump says regarding this subject is just not factual. I have no clue where or from whom he's getting his information, but they're doing him a huge disservice by feeding him talking points which are incorrect, make him appear uninformed and ignorant on the subject. At no point has he ever acknowledged the collateral damage being done to those suffering chronic pain in his war on drugs. Nor has he acknowledged the fact that the CDC illegally put together their guidelines in 2016, and those guidelines were based upon false information and manufactured research results from illegitimate, unscientific studies which lasted less than 3 months and did not include legitimate pain patients. This bears repeating. The CDC illegally put together their guidelines in 2016, and those guidelines were based upon false information and manipulated research results from illegitimate, unscientific studies which lasted less than 3 months and did not include legitimate pain patients. Nor did they consult anyone who's a professional or expert on the treatment of chronic or intractable pain patients for that matter, or for that matter, pain at all. In fact, the CDC's illegal guidelines were written in secret by individuals who had huge conflicts of interest and whose careers and finances would be significantly impacted by their successfully accomplishing the distribution of those illegal guidelines. Again, I want to emphasize the distribution of those illegal guidelines. And anybody who doubts that, I have the documentation that those guidelines were illegal in multiple ways. This document was written by the Washington Legal Foundation and sent to the CDC a full year before those guidelines were released. The document is up on our Passionate Pachyderm's website, so if you're looking for it, if you need proof of it, that's where you can find it. As an entirely predicted result of that document, thousands of Americans suffering unrelenting, excruciating pain resulting from catastrophic accidents, injuries, botched surgical and other medical procedures, American veterans wounded while serving our country, that's a huge biggie for me, as well as Americans who suffer incurable and degenerative diseases, are choosing to end their lives because their meds were drastically reduced or stopped altogether, leaving them in absolute misery with nowhere to turn and no acceptable alternatives until in their minds the only alternative left to them was to stop the pain by ending their own lives. Andrew Kolodny, as some of you know, when we were making this known that people were committing suicide due to their untreated and undertreated pain, he came out and said that that was nonsense. He didn't believe that anybody was committing suicide due to their untreated pain. Well, we all know, if you suffer chronic pain and you've been paying attention on social media, thousands of people are committing suicide. Even more people are turning to the street and ending up killing themselves with illegal drugs because they try that rather than killing themselves, and they end up killing themselves by doing illegal street drugs. So they're driving they're driving pain patients to the very thing that they're screaming they want to get rid of. I mean, you can't get any better an example of government cluster mess than that. Trump mentions nothing about these Americans, nor does he mention the more than 16 million chronic pain patients still trying to hold on. This is a glaring omission when it comes to this war on drugs he's trying to fight, one that is now beginning to come back at him. I would advise those providing his information to step up their game, or those 16 million plus chronic pain patients, their family members, friends, and loved ones who care for them and love them, will turn into 40 to 60 million votes he may not get when it comes time to go to the polls. They may not vote for the other guy, they may just stay home. And if he doesn't get those votes, guess what? He's not going to win. And he needs to stop and think about that, because it was a very narrow margin that he won last time. And I'm glad he did win. I support him probably 80-85% of the time. But on this, he just is, I don't know if it's that he's clueless, if he's not being given the information, or if they're just choosing to ignore it. But this is something that could definitely decide the election next year. Remember that, and talk about this with your friends and your relatives and your loved ones. Talk about it on social media. This is very important. We, all of us listening, all of us out here who are suffering from this, it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves, because guess what, folks? There's not anybody going to come riding in on a white horse to save us. And if we don't do it for ourselves, it's just not going to happen.
Now, all that being said, you also need to be careful, because if the other side isn't talking about it, they're not going to change things either. So it could be a situation where you've got both of the candidates and neither one of them are going to do anything. So just because Trump hasn't done anything and speaks the way he does, doesn't mean you should automatically run to the other candidate, because unless you can verify that they are absolutely willing to do this and it's someone you can trust, you're right back at square one.
Absolutely. And we're not talking about just the presidential election. Everybody in Congress is going to be up for re-election. Let those congressional representatives know that, hey, you don't pay attention to this, you're not getting these votes. And especially in congressional races, those tend to be won and lost by much smaller margins.
Right.
So that's hugely important.
Make it personal. Call them up. Tell them your story. Tell them any friends or relative stories that you know. Tell them that this needs to be fixed and that you expect him or her to do something about it if they're going to get your vote. And just keep after them. Don't let it be a one-time thing and where you call up and you go, "Hi, this is Chuck, and if you don't vote for changing the pain med regulations, I'm not going to vote for you, bye." You need to make it personal. You need to tell them the story so they realize it's actual human beings with actual problems.
And if, for those of you that follow me on Twitter, you know that I've been saying, if you can't get them to listen to you, grab a couple of your friends, maybe a couple family members, have them carry the cot for you, your sleeping bag, your pillows, march down to their offices in your area, set up that cot, that sleeping bag, those pillows, have yourselves a little party there, and call the media. Let the media know you're going to do it. Drop a dime to the media, or a quarter, I guess it is nowadays, and tell them, "Gee, did you know that there's people camping outside protesting Congressman so-and-so?" The media will be there in 30 seconds to find out, why are there people camping outside Congressman so-and-so's office? And you're going to get attention. I guarantee this. I'm a political advocate. This works, people. You have to do drastic things to get these people's attention when they're choosing to ignore you, and that's exactly what's happening. So let's get back to this. Folks, whether you're a chronic pain patient, someone who loves and cares for one or not, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this message today, one thing I'm begging you to remember, asking you to go to your Twitter and Facebook pages and discuss with your friends and followers, it's this: none of us ever plan to get seriously ill. We don't leave our homes in the morning prepared not to return for days, weeks, or months because we've suffered a freak accident on our way to or from work, or because we've been involved in a horrible car accident. Those things happen in an instant. They happen when we aren't looking, and in many cases, they leave us forced to depend upon and put our faith in our doctors. We expect those doctors to set our broken bones, operate on us, heal us, and perhaps most importantly, to ease our pain. What will you do when you or your loved one is the one screaming in agony, begging for relief from the pain you or they are suffering? When those same doctors look at you or them and say, "Nope, sorry, I'm not risking my medical license just to ease your pain," or when they tell you to take 2 Tylenol when you get home after having a knee or hip replaced, a shoulder reconstructed, or some other major surgery. Guess what, folks? It's happening right now all across our country. Hospitals and doctors are refusing to treat pain outright, whether it's acute or chronic. They're offering only non-effectual things like Motrin, Tylenol, Toradol for broken bones, and nothing at all for C-sections. If you're not outraged, if you don't stand up and fight back right now while you can, what the hell do you expect to be able to do once you're the one in unimaginable pain? This is what you can do right now. And we just kind of went over some of this, but since I have it written here, I'll go over it again because it's worth repeating. Write and call your elected representatives. Tell them you want the government to stay out of your medical care and exam room. Stop infringing on your rights as an American citizen and making it impossible for you to get adequate, appropriate pain medications and medical care. Tell them to put a leash on the DEA. Restrict them to investigating and going after illegal drugs making their way into our country and those trafficking and dealing them. Stop limiting the manufacture of safe, legal pain medications developed, tested, and designed for the treatment of pain, both acute and long-term. Remind them that this is in fact not a prescription drug crisis, but an illegal, illicitly manufactured drug crisis involving dangerous, illegally manufactured fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamine. Make that very clear, because it seems like they're not listening. It involves addicts who are using these illegal substances, mixing them with other illegally obtained drugs and or alcohol, and has nothing to do with legitimate chronic pain patients who need opiate pain medications in order to function on a daily basis. Tell them to leave our doctors alone. Stop punishing those least able to fight for themselves or fight back. Explain that there are over 100 million Americans suffering from chronic pain, 16 million plus of whom need opiate pain medications on a daily basis to function and have some quality of life. Those 16 million plus chronic pain patients are finding it nearly impossible to obtain medical care or get the opiate pain meds they need to live in exactly the same way a diabetic needs insulin to live. Let them know under no uncertain terms that if they refuse to stand and help us, they're against us. And if they are against us, they won't get our votes. The votes of our family members, friends, loved ones, or the votes of those who care for us. And 60 to 80 million votes are enough to sway any election. Demand they put a stop to the PDMP prescription drug monitoring program tracking system, which tracks all of your medications, when, where, and why you take them. It allows anyone working at a police department, hospital, doctor's office, pharmacy, or even veterinarian's office, yes, even your pet's doctor, to have access to your personal medical information and the power to deny you or even your dog pain meds and treatment based upon the often inaccurate or incomplete information found there. Start fighting back every way you can, whenever you can, wherever you can. Know that the illegal drug crisis has nothing whatsoever to do with doctors, pain medication, or pain patients. This is false information, and it has been proven to be false over and over again. They want you to believe the misinformation they're feeding you. Don't. You must watch your own state legislators and what they're doing regarding the treatment of pain as well. It will be cleverly hidden in things like opiate epidemic legislation. If you find something, read it. Make sure you understand what they're saying. And if you don't, send it to me or call your state reps and insist that they explain it to you. It's your job to protect yourself and your loved ones from this nightmare they're creating. Remember, there are only 2.1 million addicts in this country. Why must the other 331 million American citizens suffer quite literally for the bad choices of those addicted to illegal street drugs? Okay, so all of that having been said, let's begin to try and break some of this down piece by piece, section by section. I'm going to attempt to present all of this information to you in a way that makes some sort of sense. Please bear with me. There are a lot of spiders weaving this web we are caught in, and they've been at it for quite some time, so I ask you to be patient. If I mention something you don't understand, didn't know about, can't believe, or want supporting info on, a transcript of this and all the other parts to this series, as well as all of my other streams, can be found on my website, passionatepachyderms.com. Within those transcripts, you'll find all of the documenting links and materials I've used to put the stream together. Knowledge is power, so if you want to become a force to be reckoned with in this war on pain patients and their doctors, I encourage you to take what I've started and add to it. Do your own research. Don't take my word for things. If I tell you something, look it up for yourself and follow where it leads you. It's likely you will find things I didn't, and be able to add important information to what I've started. I encourage all of you to arm yourselves with the facts you find. Together, we can win. Alone, all we can do is make noise. It's your decision. I won't ever knowingly tell you anything I don't believe to be true and factual. If you've not yet seen the other 2 streams I've done on this topic, I urge you to do so prior to watching this series. You can go to my channel here on YouTube, and they're listed there. The U.S. government's war on pain patients. It's all about the money, honey. And the fake opioid crisis created and manufactured by your elected representatives and the Veterans Administration. The first 2 will provide you with needed background information and assist you in understanding the enormity of what we're up against. Just like putting a puzzle with 10,000 pieces together requires the ability to see the entire picture, so too does this issue. I believe Andrew Kolodny, PROP, and their friends are at the center of this particular part of the spider web, so I've chosen to start there with part 2. If you enjoyed this stream, please hit that thumbs up button. Doing so will push it higher on the YouTube rankings and make it easier for others to find. Also, please subscribe to the Passionate Pachyderm channel here on YouTube so that you can be notified each time we go live with a new stream, which will help, especially since this is a series of streams you won't want to miss. We invite you to join us on our website, again, passionatepachyderms.com. There you'll find transcripts of all of our videos, along with articles written by myself and other members of the herd on this topic and others. If you are so inclined, you can sign up to become a member of the more than 2.5 million Passionate Pachyderms herd. So that's just our little blurb that I give, at the end of all of my spiels. So, okay, here we go. Andrew Kolodny. Who is this Dr. Andrew Kolodny that everyone from journalists to policymakers and bloggers keep quoting as an expert on opiates? Well, a psychiatrist and board-certified addiction specialist turned policymaker, and excuse me when I say this word wrong, because I always get it wrong, buprenorphine. Oh, I did it right that time. So I'm just going to refer to it as Suboxone so you'll know what I mean. A Suboxone evangelist whose first private clinic was a Suboxone clinic. Actually, it was his only clinic that he actually practiced medicine in. We're learning now. Whose first clinic was a Suboxone clinic in New York City, established sometime between 2003 and 2005. It appears he and other health officials felt stymied by the federal limit at the time of just 30 patients for such clinics, put in place to stem corruption, because said health officials had been in the background quietly working away at this very limit, which was amended in 2006 to allow 100 patients after 1 year. So they were going from only being allowed 30 patients to, within the course of 1 year, being able to increase that to 100 addicts in 1 year. And something my doctor just told me about, and I was completely unaware of this, so I'm very glad that he told me about it. Rehab clinics are not regulated. They don't have any rules. They don't have. There's no rule that says a doctor has to be there. There's no rule that says that they have to have such and such for their meals. No rule that says that they have to provide them with a certain level of care, or do certain things, provide any kind of professional counseling. They are not federally regulated. They may have some regulations statewide, but as far as the federal government goes, rehab clinics, no regulations federally. That's interesting. So anyway, Kolodny goes from 30 patients to allowing 100 patients after 1 year, and was this was recently in the House of Representatives for being overturned altogether, so they would have be able to have unlimited patients, along with expanding legal prescribers to nurses and other non-donor medical staff. Now, when they say legal prescribers, they're talking exclusively about Suboxone, Kolodny's drug of choice. And that's interesting too, because, okay, if nurses and non-medical or non-doctor medical staff could never prescribe opiate pain medications to patients in pain throughout history, throughout all these years, and supposedly Suboxone is an opiate type of medication, why then should it be okay for nurses and non-doctor medical staff to be able to prescribe this opiate drug? To me, that just opens the door for all kinds of abuse. So, seems to me they're talking out of both sides of their face. What do you think?
Well, I find it interesting that there's no regulation for running an addiction clinic. And just for grins and giggles, I looked up what is an addiction specialist. And it states right in here that an addiction specialist doesn't necessarily have to be a doctor. What I found even more interesting on this website is it says, what are the benefits of becoming an addiction specialist? And it says there are many benefits to becoming an addiction medicine physician, joining a distinguished community of physicians whose priority it is to advance the patient care and safety. Sounds great. Can't argue with that one. Now that an addiction is becoming more visible and commonly diagnosed, there's a bigger interest and need in having a better understanding of addiction and well-trained workforce. Sounds reasonable to me.
Can't argue with that.
Can't argue with that one either. You can save lives by bridging the gap of 20 million people struggling with addiction with only 4,400 specialists.
How do they figure 20 million?
Well, that's not even the interesting one. The next two are the interesting ones. You'll have an increased practice space and clinical efficiencies and enhanced communications with colleagues, patients, and caregivers. Oh, it gets even better. This is the one that I really love. You may increase your compensation. It is estimated that physicians with board certification earn 67% more than those without it.
Wow.
Now,
67%, folks.
Now, I'm not saying that every physician who decides to become a board-certified addiction specialist is just in it for the money, because we all know that's not true. But how many of them are in it just for the money? You know, we tend to think of doctors as people on a pedestal, but if you've been through the medical community like we have, you realize that they're just as flawed as the rest of us. So while it's certainly a glorious thing to want to reach out and help people, and like I said, I'm sure many of those physicians, that's their guiding principle. But 67% increase in income with the way doctors are screaming about how they're not making any money because of all the regulations, sort of seems like a slam dunk to me.
Yeah, gee, it's kind of shedding some light on the Andrew Kolodny issue, isn't it? What happened as a result? Health officials concerned about restricted access lobbied alongside Rickett Benckiser, maker of Suboxone, for the patient cap to be raised. Oh my goodness. So the Suboxone people were lobbying right along with the physicians and the health officials. Sounds like somebody's getting a payoff to me. For the patient cap to be raised. Why should we bind, there was their quote. Why should we bind a healer's hands from helping as many as he or she could, Senator Hatch said. getting an amendment passed in 2006 which allowed doctors on request to go from 30 to 100 patients after a year. I would be interested in knowing how much money Senator Hatch got from the drug lobby that year or the following, whenever his next election was. Anybody who is doing research or wants to do research, if you would look that up for me and let me know, that would be fantastic. I would really appreciate that.
Well, and in along those same lines, why would we want to bind the hands of those that are helping and healing? Well, then why don't we just have like group exams where you just have 30 people in the room and the doctor asks a few questions, said, okay, how many of you have heart palpitations? They raise their hand, okay, we'll write you a script and off you go. How many people are having a shortness of breath? Okay, we'll listen with the stethoscope and send you out.
That may be well where they're going.
At what point does it stop becoming the healing hand and just cattle car medicine, which seems to be where the addiction clinics are right now, and we seem to be headed as a society.
Okay, so if they don't want to bind medical providers' hands, what the hell is it exactly they're doing to our doctors? Seems to me our doctors' hands are tied pretty darn tightly these days.
Unless it's for the drug of choice.
Oh, yeah, unless it's for Suboxone, that's true, yeah. Yeah, that's true. They're bound tightly when it comes to pain management. I should have clarified that. My bad. But, I'm a pain patient, and I'm, according to Kolodny and his ilk, I'm uneducated and not intelligent enough to be able to research these things and have any kind of real concept of what it is I'm talking about. So we'll just talk.
Thank God you got me.
I know, right? Exactly. With this, the stage was set for more patients, prescriptions, and problems. It's when the limit was raised from 30 that doctors started to get commercial about it, said Dr. Art Van Zee, whose buprenorphine program at a federally funded community health center in rural Virginia, which is surrounded by for-profit clinics where doctors charge $100 for weekly visits, pulling in, he estimated, about $500,000 a year per doctor. And the doctor doesn't even have to see them. All he's got to do is sign off on the Bupe prescription. They can be seen by a physician's assistant, by a nurse. Remember, there are no regulations, folks. They are not savvy about addiction medicine, don't follow patients very closely, don't do urine testing, and overprescribe, he said. That's how buprenorphine became a street drug in our area. Oh my goodness. They're using buprenorphine as a street drug, an illegally obtained opiate? Say it isn't so. In the early days of Suboxone, with Reckitt Benckiser barely marketing its own drug, Dr. Kolodny, then a New York City health official, crisscrossed the city with colleagues to spread the word about the new medication, this wonder drug, entice public hospitals to try it, and doctors, private practice doctors, enticing them with $10,000 rewards and urging doctors to get certified. Since at least 2005, Kolodny has been marketing buprenorphine as if he has a personal stake in the drug to government institutions and agencies, including prisons, public hospitals, and rehabilitation facilities. Why could that be?
I don't know. Tell me.
Couldn't be because he has some sort of financial interest in this drug.
Oh, no. Doctors are all pure.
Yeah, no, that couldn't be. In the fall of 2013, he was appointed CMO, Chief Medical Officer, of the largest chain of nonprofit detox rehab addiction facilities in the USA. These addiction facilities were cited for questionable practices and abuse between 2012 and 2015 and named Phoenix House. Shocker. Phoenix House had operating revenues of $131 million in June of 2013, according to their statement of financial position, much of which came from government funding. There's another shocker. Phoenix House championed the use of MAT, that's M-A-T, or medication-assisted treatment, and now funds his nonprofit policy influencing group, PROP, P-R-O-P, or Physicians for Responsible Prescribing. We'll get into them a little in one of our actually it's our next one after this. I wonder which drug Phoenix House primarily used.
Heroin?
Probably not. Not methadone.
No.
No. I bet it was Percocet.
Fentanyl?
Could have been fentanyl. Maybe Percocet. Oxycontin.
Probably Suboxone.
Suboxone, you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking it probably was too. Kolodny often cites the United States versus Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin, settlement in his interviews and writings. Perhaps he saw an opportunity to expand the use of buprenorphine by targeting and demeaning chronic pain patients as mere addicts. Interesting that in researching that incident in the official Purdue guilty plea document, the very words they were condemned for, claiming OxyContin to be less addictive and less subject to abuse and diversion, appear to be the exact words Kolodny uses regularly when describing the benefits of buprenorphine. Oh my God, imagine that. Kolodny regularly reminds his colleagues of the drug's advantages. He stresses that bupe, in the form of Suboxone, is safe and almost impossible to abuse. Now wait a minute. If Suboxone, if that doctor in that sleepy little Virginia town said that they were overprescribing and it was causing the bupe to get out on the streets and be abused, but now Kolodny is saying it's almost impossible to abuse.
Why would it go on the street if it's not to be abused?
It's an opiate, isn't it?
Yep.
Another question. A huge selling point at many clinics that deal with addiction. According to Kolodny, Suboxone has a second active ingredient in the mix, he explains, an anti-overdose drug called naloxone, better known as Narcan. It does nothing if you take buprenorphine as directed, but if you sniff it, inject it, or try to pack enough into your system to get high, the Narcan acts like a chemical trap, and it erases the effects of the opiate and then brings on instant withdrawal symptoms, sweating, rapid heartbeat, throwing up, agitation, all of that stuff. And according to Kolodny, that's the last time you'll try and do that. It's got to be pretty miserable. Doesn't seem like a very humane thing to do, but whatever. I guess I'm just a softie. After attempting to get the FDA to adopt these guidelines and failing in 2014, the FDA flatly refused to entertain the idea of making any of PROP's proposed changes, largely due to the lack of evidence and supporting documentation of the things PROP was attempting to pass off as fact. So, in 2015, Kolodny's organization PROP, Physicians for Responsible Opiate Prescribing, got the ear of the CDC, and members of his advisory board helped to write the now infamous, illegal, misinformed, secretively written, and rushed guidelines for prescribing opiates. While these guidelines were fairly general in nature, they've been used as a springboard for countless pieces of state legislation and DEA investigations, which has in turn led to the abuse and abandonment of chronic pain patients and doctors, as well as opiate shortages in hospitals and emergency rooms across the country. The DEA, in an attempt to prevent diversion of opiates to the black market, has cut production by an incredible 45% in the last 2 years and is now threatening to restrict production even more. All the while, hospitals, doctors' offices, pharmacies are saying, we're out, we don't have it. So they're having to cancel surgeries, people aren't able to get pain medications. I saw one person say that they just had surgery and they were supposed to get a PCA, a pain pump, and the nurse came in and said, nope, you can't have one because we don't have anything to put in it. So that patient went completely without pain medication. We can safely assume that suits Kolodny just fine, since he's publicly stated he believes opiates should be discontinued for all but those near death and post-major surgery for 2 or 3 days. Clearly, Kolodny's never had major surgery or been in an accident or had something occur that caused prolonged extreme pain. Personally, I think that the best way to train doctors is for a week of their medical school training, put one of those labor vests on them, the new vests that they can put on men that simulates them being in labor. Turn it up on high and let them wear it for a week solid, day and night, no relief. Then ask those doctors if they believe in pain relief. I bet they change their mind. Kolodny believes more treatment is needed, presumably via medication-assisted treatment, MAT, using Suboxone. Now I want to stop here for a second because we've recently uncovered some interesting information, and some of the other pain advocates found this in one of the documents that was generated from the things that happened in Oregon. And according to this document, they wanted to categorize addicts and chronic pain patients. You could be either, if you needed opiate pain medication, you couldn't just be a chronic pain patient who takes their medication responsibly, doesn't divert it, never got in trouble with it, has always stayed at the same dose. You're not just a normal patient who has a painful condition or disease and leave it at that. No, according to Kolodny, you're either an addict, in which case you need to be treated with Suboxone, or you're I forget what the abbreviation is, but it'll be coming out in some information in the coming streams. But you're this pseudo addict, and it's a term and a name that PROP made up. So if you required opiate pain medication, no matter what, you were going to be labeled either as a full-on hardcore addict and basically an addict in training. Either way, you were going to be labeled with that addict. And anybody who's ever known anybody with an addiction problem knows that if you get labeled in your medical records as an addict, you can kiss any kind of pain medication or pain treatment, no matter how horrific you're hurt, no matter how much pain you're in, you can kiss it goodbye. And especially in today's climate, having that label attached to you in your medical record can and is resulting in the few doctors out there who will treat pain patients saying, no way, I'm not touching an addict, don't want anything to do with them. So now, by doing this, they want to label all of us who suffer from chronic pain diseases and conditions as some sort of an addict, so that we're screwed for the rest of our lives. We will never be able to get adequate treatment. We have to make sure that does not happen. If you think it's hard to get adequate treatment now, it'll be impossible if that's allowed to happen. So Kolodny has hailed local municipalities and states in their ongoing pursuit of legal action against American Big Pharma, the companies who make such things as Vicodin, Percocet, but not Suboxone, and buprenorphine, also an opiate, which is made by the overseas company Reckitt-Benckiser, or Narcan, which is produced in a nasal spray exclusively by Amphastar Pharmaceuticals, a relatively new company founded in California in 1996, whose stock and Narcan prices have been rising quite a bit lately. This leads one to wonder, is Kolodny really against the use of opioids, or is it just the ones that actually help those suffering legitimate pain that he doesn't have a vested interest in? What do you think?
Well, follow the money.
Although his policies based on inaccurate data have been wildly ineffective at stopping heroin and fentanyl overdoses, and Kolodny is not a pharmacologist, opiate researcher, pain doctor, pain patient, surgeon, or even a general practitioner, he's never even been through any kind of specialized pain school that I think at one time Phoenix University had a 20-hour class that doctors could take, and they would be then a certified pain specialist, and that was all it took. Well, he's never even bothered to do that. Although he did run a private clinic for a short time in 2005 that dispensed buprenorphine, Suboxone, he has, for the majority of his career, from all accounts, been a policymaker, not directly involved with addiction patients or chronic pain patients, whom he recently claimed were simply addicts in need of compassion and treatment, presumably with Suboxone.
Now, I looked up what a psychiatrist does. I was fairly certain I knew what it was, but I figured, let's go to the web again. Psychiatry is the medical specialty devoted to diagnosing, preventing, and treating mental disorders. This includes various maladaptions related to mood, behavior, cognition, and perception. Now, in reading this definition, nowhere do I see anything about needing any knowledge about pain, pain relief, pain patients, nothing. Now, I also looked up an anesthesiologist. And anesthesia, from the Greek word without sensation, is a state of controlled, temporary loss of sensation or awareness that is induced for medical purposes. It may include anesthesia, relief or prevention of pain, paralysis, muscle relaxing, amnesia, loss of memory, or unconsciousness. A patient under the effects of anesthetic drugs is often referred to as being anesthetized. These are the doctors that have had the training to treat pain. Nowhere in Dr. Kolodny's medical education does he have anything close to that. In fact, speaking of his medical education, it appears that when you look up Dr. Kolodny, there's no way of knowing what he really did, where he went to school, what degrees he got from what universities. Typically, when someone is touted as an expert in their field, it comes with a long pedigree. Well, apparently Dr. Kolodny has hidden his pedigree, which makes me wonder, is there something in that pedigree that disagrees with what he's saying? Or is it just that there really isn't a pedigree and the drug companies that he works for have created him as an expert? What do you think?
Well, he does list, the only pedigree that we were able to uncover is just his own listing of where he went to school, supposedly, but there's no information listed. I mean, I looked at, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's just hold on, because that's a little bit further down. So let me just stop there for a second before we get too far ahead of ourselves. Kolodny cited and quoted in an impressive number of articles and interviews as a compassionate person who wants to see people and their families heal from the devastation of addiction, which is why it is intriguing to find quotes from him that weren't, well, nice at all. Here's one quote. It's the FDA's role to vigilantly regulate the approval, labeling, and promotion of pharmaceutical products, not that of counties or municipalities. County and municipal lawyers are inadequately qualified to make or enforce federal drug policy, and these lawsuits serve as a vehicle for local governments to seek revenue through ill-informed measures under the guise of drug abuse prevention. Wow. I'll tell you what, I would not want to be Andrew Kolodny and be driving through some town in which one of those lawyers and municipalities and police officers knew about this quote. In a May 30, 2014 interview with FDA Week, a CLAD spokesman voiced these positions and expressed concern that these lawsuits are part of a trend that will distract us from the real meaningful approaches to reducing prescription drug abuse. After reading the interview, Andrew Kolodny, president of Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, or PROP, and chief medical officer of Phoenix House, contacted CLAD via telephone to condemn its comments. During this conversation, Kolodny threatened that the Internal Revenue Service would revoke CLAD's tax-exempt status when alerted to the comments, which he believes conflict with CLAD's charitable mission. CLAD takes these false allegations and threats very seriously. My question here is, who the hell is Andrew Kolodny that he thinks he can pick up the phone and call the Internal Revenue Service and get anything done? The very thought that came into his mind makes me question just what the hell's going on, that he thinks he has some sort of powerful in with government entities like the Internal Revenue Service, of all things. I mean, you say those 3 words and Anybody who owns a business or ever has owned a business or paid taxes, any individual who's paid taxes starts to shiver and sweat. And here's Kolodny threatening to sick this organization on municipalities and cities and counties. That's crazy.
That's a big head.
Critics who categorically dispute the motives of organizations like CLAD and its diverse coalition members are at best narrowly focused. I believe this is a quote from Kolodny. Their zealotry reveals their otherwise undisclosed health insurance industry bias. At worst, they endanger the lives of people who live with pain and other conditions that can require controlled substances by stifling access to quality care. Wow. Talk about, the guy, he doesn't know what he's saying. He's talking out of both sides of his face. Anyone who questions Kolodny's authority, expertise, policies, or the efficacy of his pet drug, buprenorphine, is loudly dismissed by Kolodny as uneducated, addicted, or corrupt, regardless of how closely they actually work with addicts and pain patients. Kolodny makes a practice of banning those who disagree with him on social media platforms like Twitter as well. Apparently, if you don't agree with him completely about all things and sing his praises, he isn't interested in discussing the issue of addiction or the fact that chronic pain patients who need opiate pain medications to function in their daily lives are being made to pay the price for those with addiction problems by having their medications severely cut back or stopped altogether. And that is leading to catastrophic consequences for those who have never abused drugs or taken their medications in any way other than as prescribed by their physicians. When Kolodny was told that pain patients are committing suicide in desperation as a result of their pain medications being stopped or severely reduced with no hope of relief in the future, Kolodny stated he didn't believe anyone had committed suicide due to the undertreatment or untreated pain, and that the stories were all made up, presumably by pain patients that, in his opinion, were addicts. Apparently, those who died just didn't know it. Hardly the picture of a compassionate individual, in my opinion. In fact, I'd love to explain to Dr. Kolodny that many chronic pain patients are feeling so increasingly desperate that they're turning to the very street drugs killing people in a desperate attempt to get some relief and be able to care for themselves and their families. Many feel as though they have nothing left to lose. Policies and attitudes like those he spews to anyone willing to listen have directly impacted chronic pain patients' health, freedom, ability to be parents or grandparents, their work, hobbies, family, finances, friends, and every other aspect of their lives. Physically unable to stand up to the onslaught coming at them from all sides without the help of medications, many of them have been have been taking without incident for decades. They feel powerless and victimized. The media ignores their pleas for help. Their elected representatives gaslight them and ignore the tens of thousands of letters and phone calls pleading for representation and assistance. They are treated like criminals and drug addicts, forced to endure painful, invasive procedures, many of which are not FDA approved, and surgeries that more often than not leave them worse off than they were before in order to obtain even a fraction of the medication it takes to adequately control their pain. They're forced to take drug screen tests regularly as if they've already been found guilty of some imagined crime, submit to pill counts, sign contracts that strip them of their rights and freedoms, and then, if they manage to get a script for pain medications, they must endure abusive treatment at their pharmacies. Their privacy is invaded, their medications are tracked, and very often they're turned away and forced to go in search of a pharmacy willing to fill their legal, legitimate prescription. If they have an emergency medical situation which requires a visit to the emergency room, they are treated as though they're drug seekers, criminals, and addicts. They're disrespected and denied care. Their pleas for pain relief are ignored regardless of the presenting condition. They've been physically and verbally abused to the point where most chronic pain patients will tell you emphatically that no matter how bad things get, how hurt or sick they become, they will never go to the emergency room. It is now a place of abuse, torture, and neglect rather than one of compassion and assistance. These people have committed no crime, done nothing wrong. They are not addicts, nor are they drug seeking. They are people with complicated medical histories, legitimate conditions, and diseases, many of which are rare and or incurable. According to the FDA, their pain is physiologically no different than that of a cancer patient. Pain is pain, regardless of the underlying condition causing it, and must be adequately and appropriately treated. That's from the FDA, folks. But self-described expert Andrew Kolodny, who has zero experience with physical medicine, is not a pain specialist, anesthesiologist, or pharmacologist, isn't a medical doctor who has ever treated the conditions and diseases referred to above, disagrees with his with this opinion. We're all just addicts who apparently need to be treated with Suboxone and Narcan and forced into drug rehab. His deluded thought process has infected much of the medical profession. In my opinion, any medical professional found guilty of these offenses should be held responsible for each and every moment these patients are forced to endure unimaginable pain without adequate treatment. Under-treatment is exactly the same as refusal of treatment. Both are grounds for medical malpractice. Additional info about being unable to but that didn't even make sense. Sorry about that. The following is conjecture. My personal thoughts on the matter, to be clear, what follows is merely a possible hypothesis. It could be right on the mark, or it could just as easily be completely wrong. That said, here's a question. How does someone who has never actually really practiced medicine except for a very short period at an addiction treatment center in New York City shortly after finishing college become a supposed self-appointed expert in something like the treatment of pain patients, thwarting tens of thousands of medical doctors with decades of real physical hands-on experience, and then burst onto the scene telling everyone and anyone that he is the expert in all things opiate related, and all these other real experts don't know anything at all. And how do you do that and have absolutely nothing on the internet about your college years? Your dissertation for your graduate degree isn't published anywhere, and there are no news clippings about anything you did prior to 2010. I've been searching all day for the past 7 hours for anything that might explain this quandary, and I've come up with nada, not one thing on Kolodny prior to that time. So in my conservative conspiracy-oriented mind, the only thing I can come up with is he isn't qualified. What if, I'm just asking the question, I'm not stating anything, what if whatever credentials he listed when he took the job at the addiction place in New York City in 2005 were bogus, and he is just skated with no one having ever checked the validity of his credentials? What if? Perhaps the sudden spring to fame and fortune was initially born of covering his ass. I know, kind of far-fetched, but hey, wouldn't it be something if that were the case and we could out him? Kolodny started all this nonsense, and yet there is nothing out there to be found on him. I can't even find out who his parents are, and that tells me he or someone on his behalf has had the internet scrubbed of his information. Why would someone do that if they were proud of their accomplishments, proud of their schooling and the work it took to get through it? My God, if I was a doctor, my life would be an open book. My scholarships would have been on the internet, everything. Any sports I played, whatever books I read. I mean, because as you're going to college and you're getting ready to become a physician, you want that notoriety. When people look you up on the internet, as soon as you get out of college, they want to see that you've got something going for you, that you've done something. And I found it just amazing that there was absolutely nothing. It's just, I mean, you know as well as I do that if you Googled your primary care provider, for example, a ton of stuff would be returned just by virtue of them being a doctor. Just to prove my theory, I Googled my doctor. And I can follow him all the way back to his scholarships that he got and his parents' names, where they lived. But there's nothing on Kolodny. I wonder what would happen if someone asked these questions and pointed out nothing can be found on him. Unlike that, which can be found on virtually every other MD. And what if he wasn't actually a doctor? What if he was a created college dropout? What if he didn't, in fact, have any medical degree at all? And all of these government agencies were blindly following where he has led them in spite of him not having the qualifications to go there. Wouldn't that be so huge a scandal and wide-reaching liability on each and every entity that failed to confirm his credentials, that it would virtually bring all of this to an end immediately? Or would our benevolent government engage in the biggest game of cover your ass ever seen and sweep it under the rug like they have, say, Agent Orange? Again, just thoughts, and something one might consider if, of course, they believed in conspiracy theories, which, of course, I don't. But one last thing, wouldn't a psychopath need to come out and run his mouth and try and prove that this was untrue, to answer the questions being presented and prove he in fact did or does have the appropriate credentials? An interesting thought. Too bad we haven't uncovered anything to prove or disprove it. I'm Passionate Pachyderms, and this is Chuck Pithy. We hope you've enjoyed this stream and that you'll join us for part 3 in this series, in which we'll cover PROP and its board members, followed by part 4 on PDMPs and Narxcare. If you enjoyed this stream, please hit that thumbs up button. Doing so will push it higher up in the YouTube rankings and make it easier for others to find. Also, please subscribe to the Passionate Pachyderm channel here on YouTube so that you can be notified each time we go live with a new stream, which will help, especially since this is a series of streams you won't want to miss. Let me just check the...
While she's checking the comments, I just wanted to say, at times you could tell we had some levity on the subject, and I guess part of that comes from our frustration of what we're trying to do and the roadblocks that keep falling in front of all of the pain patients. So if you sensed a little levity and a little sarcasm, it's just due to the incredible frustration we have on this whole subject. Trust me, we take it seriously, and we spend hours trying to find the answers and trying to find ways that we can change things. And we challenge you to do the same thing.
And I want to thank Gypsy Soul and Pyro Rose for joining us in the chat portion of the live stream. Hi guys, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed this. I don't see that you guys had any particular questions or anything. So please, anyone who comes afterwards and watches the video of this live stream, feel free to leave your comments, questions, whatever, in the comments section. And I'm very good about writing back to everyone. Whether you just say, hey, how you doing? I will always write back and respond to you. So please don't hesitate at all to do that. You have our contact information, passionatepachyderms.com. Again, there you'll find transcripts of all of our videos, along with articles written by myself and other members of the herd on this topic and many, many others. We've been around for almost 17 years, and the website has been in existence almost that long. If you're so inclined, you can sign up to become a member of the more than 2.5 million passionate pachyderm herd. And that's it for tonight. You all have a great night. Stay safe. And remember, only you can save you. Let's get it done.